Hi, welcome. My name is David Bedford. A lot of you know me from my first book, Liverpool. Then I've also published the Fab 104 and Finding the Fourth Beatle. Lots of other projects, including being the associate producer and historian for the documentary Looking for Lennon. I want to tell you about my new book, which is called The Country of Liverpool, Nashville of the North. So what's that all about? Is it just a country book? Yes and no, and I'll explain why. A few years ago, I was introduced to a guy called Phil Brady. Now, he was in a group called Phil Brady and the Ranchers, started in the early 60s, country and western group. Phil had kept newspaper cuttings, flyers, tickets, all kinds of stuff, all these great photos, and he brought it to me in a suitcase and said, there you go, what can you do with that? Now, for a historian, it's a dream come true. It's wonderful, there's so much stuff in there. And so, with interviewing Phil over the next couple of years, I want to put together his biography. But what I realised was there was the biggest story to be told, which was, well, hang on, why the Nashville of the North? What did that mean? Well, Liverpool in the 60s, yes, we were famous for Mersey Beats and the Beatles, but we were called the Nashville of the North because Liverpool had the biggest country and western scene in Europe. It was huge here. Now, a lot that goes back to the Cunard Yanks. If you don't know about them, they were the Liverpool seamen who sailed with the Merchant Navy, normally on the Liverpool to New York run. When they got to New York, they would go off, they would go and buy cameras and suits and all kinds of stuff. But they would buy records and bring them back to Liverpool. Now, these were country and western, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, you name it. All this music was coming back into Liverpool. Of course, the biggest star, and probably the one that inspired not just the country stars in Liverpool, but a lot of the beat musicians as well, was Hank Williams. Hank Williams was a massive influence on all these musicians because when you go back and you listen to the music he was doing, you can hear the seeds of rock and roll in his songs. Go and listen to Move It On Over. That was almost the melody taken and used for Rock Around the Clock. Hank Williams was the influence for all these musicians. One of his biggest fans was John Lennon. So then I started thinking, well, hang on, let's look at the country roots of the Beatles, because once you start looking, it's all there. Because the first music they were playing was skiffle. Skiffle has its roots in American country, folk and bluegrass. A lot of the songs that the Quarrymen played were country songs. If you look at one of their first business cards, the music it says is country, western, skiffle, rock and roll. So the country roots were there. Then you start digging and you watch how they changed. Yes, they took on so many different influences like R&B and rock and roll. But look at the artists that they covered. Look at the ones who influenced them. Elvis, Buddy Holly, Carl Perkins, Everly Brothers. You could go on and on and on. All these artists had their roots in country music. So then I went looking at the songs the Beatles recorded. And I put together a playlist, and I've got about, I think, 25 songs of songs the Beatles recorded, all with their roots in country. One of the Beatles' albums, John actually said, was their country and western album, or he actually referred to it as crumbly and western. So they actually looked at one of their albums as a country and western album. Can you guess which one that is? As a little test for you. So we had the Beatles developing, going off and doing their new sound. But at the same time in Liverpool, as the Mersey Beat thing was happening, the country and western scene was happening. And when you go back and look at some of the lineups on the night, you'd have beat groups and country groups on the same bill. There was a great overlap. Now, the three sort of main country bands that came from Liverpool were Phil Brady and the Ranchers, the Hillsiders, and Hank Walters and the Dusty Road Ramblers. So I'll do a little pen picture of them as to what was going on. Now, for the Hillsiders, their driving force was Kenny Johnson. He started out, his group was Sonny Webb and the Cascades. Now, they had a heavy country influence, but there was a lot of beat music in there. But as the Beatles took off, he was thinking, well, do we just become another of the Liverpool groups, or do we do what we really love, and that's country music? They chose country music and became the Hillsiders. And they became a top act, recorded in Nashville, appeared on British television, one of the biggest names ever. So we had all these different country artists in Liverpool. So with Phil Brady's amazing suitcase of artifacts, I've put together his biography telling his musical journey, and there's so many twists and turns. But Phil became the #1 country act in Britain. He recorded several albums. In '68 he went over to Nashville. He met up with so many different big stars. He spent a day with Willie Nelson on his ranch. Willie Nelson gave him a song that he could record. He spent a day with Bobby Bear, and Bobby Bear teamed up with the Hillsiders and recorded an album with them. So he had this amazing experience over in Nashville and came back, and his career just blossomed. Now he played on the same bill as the biggest names in country music, like Hank Snow, Buck Owens, and of course Willie Nelson a couple of times. And this is when Willie Nelson wore a suit, had short, neat, cropped hair. We've got photos of that as well. So Phil Brady's career was incredible, and this was all happening at the same time the Beatles was happening. Now one of the great country music stories, in a way, coincides with the Beatles towards the end of their 1964 American tour. They had a little bit of time off, so they flew into a little town in Arkansas called Walnut Ridge. They were then taken to a ranch owned by a guy called Reed Pigman, and they spent days there. And there's a wonderful photo, it's in the book, of the Beatles on horseback with their cowboy hats on, and they were living the cowboy dream. And I thought, well, why would they live in the cowboy dream? Then you go back to growing up in Liverpool in the 40s and the 50s. They were obsessed with cowboys. There's a great guy from Manchester called Gary McMahon, and he's been doing research on what were the Beatles' generation watching on television, radio, films. And he's compiled this chapter for the book with all these different cowboy films, all the Western TV series. The influence was huge. They loved cowboys and Indians. And so we've got this wonderful picture of the Beatles on this ranch on horseback with their cowboy hats. Now when they came back to Walnut Ridge, it's a really small town. Word got out that they were around. And I spoke to a lady, Carrie May. She was there. She went there with the camera and has got some amazing photos of the Beatles at that airport. The story is amazing too. So they're in the book as well. So Phil's career, it's amazing. He appears on television, he tours Europe, he's been all over the place. So we'll follow his story then into the 70s. Alongside that, we look at what the Beatles did after they split up. Ringo, of course, one of the first albums he recorded was Boku of Blues, a complete country album recorded out in Nashville. Ringo, as we know, he always had his roots in country and western. He loved the stuff, and a lot of that was his influence on the Beatles' music. That's why you got country songs in there. But as John and as Paul and George all said, they were picking up those influences from country music anyway. So we look at Ringo's trip over to Nashville, then look at Paul McCartney's trip to Nashville. He went there with Wings when they were recording Junior's Farm, and a lad called Danny Ely managed to talk his way onto the farm where they were staying and spent a couple of weeks hanging out with Paul McCartney and Wings. So we've got some great photos from that as well. So you've got these amazing country stories going on. Bring it back to Phil Brady's career and what was going on with country music in Britain. I've got a chapter which I call Achy Breaky, Hearty Breaky, so you can probably guess where this is going. The subtitle is How One Man and His Mullet Killed Country Music. That's what happened over here. Billy Ray Cyrus, line dancing, killed the country music scene. It was terrible. But people like Phil kept going as a solo artist. Then he would get a band back together. Phil is now 81, but can still perform. His voice is as good as ever. In fact, I think it's gone even deeper, which is remarkable. He can still perform, and his story is a great one. When you put that alongside the country roots of the Beatles, this is being told for the first time. This is the untold story of the Beatles' roots of country music, and also the untold story, really, of the country roots of the Liverpool music scene and for the Liverpool musicians. So that's a brief overview of what's in the book. At the moment you can pre-order it if you want. Just go to my website, davidabedford.com, and you can pre-order it. It's coming out as a limited edition, only 250. I've already sold quite a few. These will be signed and numbered, so get yours in when you can. There will then be later editions in softback and ebook. At the moment there's only the new hardback limited edition you can pre-order. So come along, find the Facebook page, Country of Liverpool. Find the website if you want to have a look at that, thecountryofliverpool.com. To pre-order you can go via that website or come back to my one, davidabedford.com, and come and discover why Liverpool was the Nashville of the North.